Um, Welcome everyone to session 7 of our study of the Gospel of Mark. We are almost, we're more than, about halfway through now. After today, we'll be very close to being halfway through. And today we're going to hit sort of a moment or a point of transition that we're going to come to, that Mark is starting to transition the story on a more, what I'll call a downhill arc. And we'll get to that. But so a basic recap of what we've done so far in the first 6 chapters is that we've seen after the parable of the sower, in particular in chapter 4, we've seen some really wonderful, detailed illustrations of the various soil that meets the seed or the message that Jesus is bringing. So we've seen those who are healed represent the good soil. And it's not because, we have to be careful. The being good soil is something that is a choice from within. It's not just something you are or you're not. It's about a choice from within. And so those who are healed represent that good soil. We've seen in increasing examples of the disciples representing that rocky soil, illustrated not only by Peter's own nickname, but also that initial positive response that they give now being tempered by what Mark has specifically called a hardening of their hearts, which is a very, that phrase is very much rooted in Israel's history and lore. We've mentioned last week that represents Pharaoh. That in Mark's gospel, that also represents the Pharisees. So the disciples are becoming more like the Pharisees in the way they're responding. That's not good. We've seen thorny soil, and we've seen at least one example of that so far, and that would have been Herod. So someone that in the narrative is given some positive characteristics. Herod actually wanted to hear John, and that word "hear," John the Baptist, when I say John, but that word "hear" is something that Mark uses repetitively in chapter 3, I believe, to indicate that those who are good soil need to be good hearers. Those who, with ears to hear, then listen, that sort of thing. So Herod exhibits some of those positive qualities. And it's like he could go either way, but in the end, the thorny soil is the type that one way or another, other influences, aside from the deep-rootedness of one's faith, they sort of grow in and squeeze out the possibility of that faith actually bearing fruit. They stunt the faith. It's similar in some ways to rocky soil, except that thorny soil actually has good soil. Okay, it's actually good soil, but it just gets squelched from above. So that's kind of Herod, and we'll see other examples of that too. So today in chapter 7, we have a continuation. And again, when you chop it up like this, I hope that's why I recap it like this, because we're connected to what we've just seen. The 3 stories that we read today, and they continue into chapter 8, they sit between, they're sort of healing / controversy stories that sit between the first feeding story, the one that's the feeding of the 5,000, and then it's going to be sandwiched by the feeding of the 4,000. Okay, these are symbolic stories, and we'll get to, all right, what does that mean? Why are they 2 different numbers? What is the whole correlation here? What's happening? Well, we'll start to see that, but that's partly for next week. But we're going to start to see indications of where that's going. In the initial, the bulk of chapter 7 is this long, ongoing kind of conversation that lays out once again, or illustrates once again, how the Pharisees are just the kind of soil that you just can't penetrate. They're just that hard path. They are just presented as being always opposition to Jesus. And so, but he uses them to great effect to really help explain why he's coming in with the message that he does. And we'll get to what is it that whole interaction is supposed to leave us with, as an audience, as a reading audience. And then we come to 2 very curious healing stories at the end, and one in particular. Actually, both of them have some confounding elements, but particularly the story about the Syrophoenician woman is one that has puzzled many Bible studiers, Bible commentators, and scholars throughout the generations. But what I hope you see is that when read in context of Mark's narrative and understanding where we've been and taking all that in mind as we see what Jesus says to this woman, it will help alleviate some of the confusion and the confounding nature of that. It'll give us a lot more clarity. I hope. I always hope that. So that's basically what we're going to cover today. And having said that, is there any comments or questions that you have before we get into our reading? Carol.
Just one comment about the outline that you did.
Oh, sure.
That is awesome. And I hope you can keep doing that, because it just kind of, glancing at it, kind of reminds you of where you've been and where we're going. It's perfect.
And thank you. And, it's because outlines are actually really helpful for us to see patterns. When I used to do outlines as a kid, I thought it tedious, because it just was like, oh, you got to do this, and it's A, and then one, and then, but no, when you see it like this, there's almost it almost gives a sense of meter to what is being presented, and it helps us link categories and see consistencies or discrepancies, or it just helps give shape to the story. So I'm glad that that's helpful, and I will continue to try to do that for you as it's relevant. I might not do it every class, but I can maybe present different bulk, because you can, as you saw, I think I took it through chapter 8, didn't I? In that one, yeah. So it's already taking us through where I sort of referenced today with that second feeding. So thank you. I'm glad it's helpful.
Where would we find that?
It's a secret, boys. Okay, it's just in last week's notes. The outline is in session 6, Mark session 6 notes. So if you go on the church website, you'll always see the notes attached underneath the video.
Oh, okay.
If you watch
I haven't done that.
Yeah. Yeah. So you can access all of them. And anyone that's watching this, who's not, say, live with this Zoom meeting, anyone's watching this now, can go back to our church website and click on some of those notes, or all of those notes, and you'll have basically what I use to help move this conversation along. Oh, yes, Marilyn.
I was very surprised by how, I want to use the word sharp, how kind of sharp Jesus was with when he realized that his disciples didn't understand what he'd been saying, and he was so upset with the was it Pharisees? Anyway, I hadn't really ever noticed that before, but it seemed like not only did he have displeasure, but he was really showing it.
Yeah. And I think you're absolutely right that as Mark writes this gospel, there's a ratcheting up of tension that this matters. And so the stakes are high. And I think the way Jesus is presented is partly to help move that part of the story along. It ratchets up the tension for us, but also it's just a real clearer, it's a sharp but clear illustration of wherein the faithful responses versus the fearful responses are, wherein the God versus Satan differences are, wherein the good soil versus bad soil is. It helps us as an audience to see much more clearly. Okay, well, I see why he's getting upset, because how many times has he had this conversation with them, kind of thing. And that's the point, that the disciples keep asking questions about stuff that we get as an audience. We have seen that, we get it. Why don't they get it? But that's how we're supposed to respond as an audience, because it makes us it energizes us to say, oh man, how is it that these groups are missing it? And wait, am I getting it? Mark is shaping us as responders. So when we notice the energy of Jesus or the energy of different characters shifting, I believe it's Mark's way of bringing more tension as the plot sort of moves along to reach the climactic point of the passion story and the crucifixion, and then the afterwards. But it's really good to notice that. And Jesus never, the way Jesus reacts, it's never just sort of purely about the emotion. It's always there's always a reason why he reacts the way he does. And I think we'll see that today. For instance, in his sharpness, not only with the Pharisees, but his sharpness with, or what we often read as sharpness, with the Syrophoenician woman. We'll see that.
Mhm.
Thank you.
So in
Yeah.
this particular instance, is he kind of modeling how we're to behave or not?
Modeling how we're to behave in terms of his sharpness.
If we get, if we
I
get,
think he's illustrating something else that will certainly impact the way we behave. It's meant to shift, or to shift our perspective on ourselves and our own judgments and assessments. But I don't know that he's trying to say, so when you engage someone, do it like this. No. It's a teaching tool that he uses. And the brilliance of Jesus, both the way he is presented in the Gospels and who we think we know as a teacher, from history, is that he uses everything. He uses any kind of tool he can, like any great teacher. He will use humor. He will use sarcasm. He will get under your skin because he wants you to pay attention. So whatever it is, he's not just out there telling stories, and he's not just sort of a one-trick pony. He's using a lot of different rhetorical devices and skills to really reach people. And so I think we see some of that today. Horty.
Go ahead.
Okay. Wow. I have had in my life some really, really, really amazing teachers. And as you talk about sharpness, I'm thinking of a time when one of these great teachers directed sharpness at me.
Yeah.
And how decimated I was.
Yep.
And yet what I said was to myself and to this person, that will never, never happen again.
Amen.
And it was like so solemn. And just as you're saying this, I say yes to the fact that I've learned some great lessons by not having always been treated kindly by great teachers.
Yes, Horty, absolutely. And it's sort of like how we often talk about the use of guilt. Guilt is a powerful tool, but it is a dangerous tool. Guilt can be used in a sharp manner to wake us up and maybe shame us for a moment, but only to evoke resolve that says, I will never do that again, or I will learn from this and I will grow from this. The kind of guilt that we often associate with, say, if we were brought up Catholic, that's sort of that, and I don't mean to defame the Catholic Church, but guilt can also be this burden that we just assume on ourselves, that it's like a state of being. That is not the purpose of guilt. That is not what guilt is for. It's unfortunately how it's weaponized, but guilt as a tool can really be a wake-up call. And I'm not saying that you're referring to guilt in your what your remarks are, Horty, but that sharpness that guilt can be, whatever it is. Sometimes those tools that do sort of humble us or bring us low for a moment are the wake-up calls that we need. And all I'm saying is that Jesus will use whatever tools are at his disposal to wake up his audience, because the stakes are that high. It matters how we respond. Anyone else? Okay, we're going to read all of chapter 7. I'm going to switch us over to the shared screen. Can I get a couple hands that I could use as my initial people for the reading? We'll read a couple paragraphs, each kind of thing. I'll try to help guide you with that, but can I get a couple hands? Horty, Kathleen, and Marilyn. Okay. And did I see you, Barbara Tillman? Or no, I didn't see. Okay. Okay. Let's start with 3 and then we'll take it from there. All right, here. All right, Horty, would you start us off and maybe just read through 8 verses or so? We just need to unmute.
Sorry.
That's okay.
If you loved me, you'd know what I was thinking. Am I unmuted now?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now when the Pharisees and some of the scribes who had come from Jerusalem gathered around him, they noticed that some of his disciples were eating with defiled hands, that is, without washing them. For the Pharisees and all the Jews do not eat unless they thoroughly wash their hands, thus observing the tradition of the elders, and they do not eat anything from the market unless they wash it. And there are also many other traditions that they also observe, the washing of cups, pots, and bronze kettles. So the Pharisees and scribes asked him, why do your disciples not live according to the tradition of the elders, but eat with defiled hands? He said to them, Isaiah prophesied rightly about you, about your hypocrites, as is written. This people honors me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching human precepts as doctrines. You abandon the commandment of God and hold them to human tradition.
Thank you. Kathleen, would you read from verse 9 through 23?
Yes. Then he said to them, you have a fine way of Then he said to them, you have a fine way of rejecting the commandment of God in order to keep your tradition. For Moses said, honor your father and your mother, and whoever speaks evil of father or mother must surely die. But you say that if anyone tells father or mother, whatever support you might have had from me is korban, that is an offering to God, then you no longer permit doing anything for a father or mother, thus making void the word of God through your tradition that you have handed on. And you do many things like this. Then he called the crowd again and said to them, listen to me, all of you, and understand. There is nothing outside a person that by going in can defile, but the things that come out are what defile. When he had left the crowd and entered the house, his disciples asked him about the parable. He said to them, then do you also fail to understand? Do you not see that whatever goes into a person from outside cannot defile, since it enters not the heart, but the stomach, and goes out into the sewer? Thus he declared all foods clean. And he said, it is what comes out of a person that defiles. For it is from within, from the human heart, that evil intentions come: fornication, theft, murder, adultery, avarice, wickedness, deceit, licentiousness, envy, slander, pride, folly. All these evil things come from within, and they defile a person.
Thank you. Great job with that list. Let's see. Marilyn, would you take us home from 24 to the end, 37?
I hope I'm going to pronounce the woman's,
Syrophoenician.
oh, thank you. The Syrophoenician woman's faith. From there he set out and went away to the region of Tyre. He entered a house and did not want anyone to know he was there, yet he could not escape notice. But a woman whose little daughter had an unclean spirit immediately heard about him, and she came and bowed down at his feet. Now the woman was a Gentile of Syrophoenician origin. She begged him to cast the demon out of her daughter. He said to her, let the children be fed first, for it is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs. But she answered him, Sir, even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs. Then he said to her, for saying that, you may go. The demon has left your daughter. So she went home, found the child lying on the bed, and the demon gone. Oh, did you want me to go farther?
Yeah, would you mind just finishing the last paragraph?
Okay. Jesus cures a deaf man. Then he returned from the region of Tyre and went by way of Sidon towards the Sea of Galilee in the region of Decapolis. They brought to him a deaf man who had an impediment in his speech, and they begged him to lay his hand on him. He took him aside in private, away from the crowd, and put his fingers into his ears, and he spat and touched his tongue. Then looked up to heaven. He sighed and said to him,
I'm going to let you do that one.
Ephatha.
Yeah, that's it.
Ephatha. That is, be opened. And immediately his ears were opened. His tongue was released, and he spoke plainly. Then Jesus ordered them to tell no one. But the more he ordered them, the more seriously they proclaimed it. They were astounded beyond measure, saying, he has done everything well. He even makes the deaf to hear and the mute to speak.
Thank you all for help with the reading there. Okay. Let's just go right through it then. So that first episode, that first 23 verses or so, is quite a long conversation. And most of it, the bulk of it, is with the Pharisees. So just in general, what is the overall point that Mark is trying to get across in that sort of extended controversy, talk, with the Pharisees and then the crowds and then the disciples, all that? What's the point of that? Barbara Tellman?
I think he's trying to tell them again that it is what's in your heart, not what you do outside, that's important.
Absolutely. He's really naming once again, and it's good that you said it like that. Once again, he is saying that it is about the heart of an individual, not about nationality or sex or religious custom or tradition or the law, any of that. It is about the heart of an individual responder that matters. That's it. And what else? What else is he trying to help them see here? Horty?
It seemed to me that he was making a contrast between the laws of man and the laws of God.
Yes. In much the same way that we saw in those initial chapter 2 stories. Remember the stories of Jesus walking and plucking the heads of the wheat, or then the whole new wine in old wineskins. It's the same kind of, he's reiterating that similar point that that the law was made for humans, not the other way around. He's trying to say that, but also that you need to be able to adapt the law and the customs to new circumstances. That requires it. So he's setting up this greater conversation that we know is an important one. Okay, it's a very important conversation. It's not just about the way we apply the law to our lives, but it's about, there's something very much more specific that he'll get to, especially when he talks to the disciples. But just to also be clear, how many times does he make his argument about this heart versus, tradition or custom or law thing? How many times did Jesus make that argument in this proportion? If you're not sure, a lot of times you can be safe by guessing 3, 7, or 12. It's just a good guess, but in this case, it's 3. He makes it 3 times. He makes the argument to the Pharisees. That's sort of the longer one. But then he also says, he says to the crowds, he goes out and says, hey, any of you, listen up and understand this. It's the heart, okay? It's not what goes in you, it's what comes out that defiles, okay? Everyone got that? Good. And then he goes in, and once again, we see in a similar way, as after the parable of the sower, the disciples are like, so wait a second, Jesus, can you explain this to us again? And what does Jesus say to them? So you too fail to understand. You see how he's once again using the same language that he used when they were in the boat, when they were after the sower, after so many different parables where the disciples display their inability to get it, i.e. their rocky soil in their response. It's a way of helping us to more differentiate, to say, oh, see, they really are being rocky soil, because the truth is, as an audience, we get it. We see, we're like, okay, this is not that hard, people. We get what Jesus is trying to say. Why are the disciples so confused? Mark is using that means of their confusion, not only to explain it more to us, but to help create more distance between us and the disciples, or us as an audience, and the types of responses that do not bear fruit. That's what's happening in this. Any comments or questions about that? Oh, Steve.
Yeah, in my text, it says that he thus he declared all foods clean.
We'll
That
get to
seemed
that.
to me to be in direct opposition to the customs in the Jewish tradition at that time.
It's so good that you notice this. And I wonder, I bet a lot of you kind of came across that and you're like, huh. But in one, phrase of just a few words, that statement right there turns everything on its head. Okay. That's a huge issue. If you've ever read the letters of Paul, which were written, I believe all of them were written, all of Paul's letters, yes, absolutely, were written well before the Gospel of Mark. One of the main controversies that Paul comes up to time and again has to do with table fellowship, dietary laws, cleanliness, all that stuff, okay? And the fact that, well, as we do this movement, this Jesus thing, it's a Jewish movement, but it's also welcoming Gentiles. So we're going to require the Gentiles to pretend to be Jewish and practice. Remember all that stuff? And what does Paul say? Or where do the communities come down most often? Is that no, we will not require Gentiles to abide by Jewish custom, that it's a much more open door policy. Mark, in one phrase, is sort of illustrating how important that very same policy is for his approach to presenting the gospel, for this new community that Mark's talking about, that is welcoming of anyone, Jew or Gentile, doesn't matter, because it's all about here. It's all about the heart soil. So Mark, in one phrase, has basically just flipped the dietary laws on its head. I mean, it's actually kind of funny the way it's written. It's just like, oh, and so basically thereby declared all foods clean. Okay, that's a big move, but it illustrates something that was obviously very important to Mark and one of the major sources of controversy in the early Christian movement as it was growing. Any questions or comments about that? Horty, and then Ken.
You were asking what is our response to the lack of insight by the disciples. And I personally found it really comforting for just the reason you're talking about. As an audience member, I did get it, and it seems like they were presented as not having gotten it, which means I don't have to be a disciple to get it.
Yes.
I can just be me.
But that's exactly what Mark is trying to do. And reading this story on that level, the way that Horty just named, is a really important skill. Because too often we read it and we want to read it and feel bad for the disciples, or feel like, oh, why is he being so hard on the disciples? It's not about the disciples. This gospel is not really about those characters that are presented as whatever kind of soil. This gospel is about you. It's about what kind of soil you might be. And everything that's happening is shaping you to see the different types of soils that are out there, and what might get in the way of you responding in a certain way, or what might encourage you to. And you, as you react, pay attention to what you're doing. It's sort of like when we watch a movie and we're like, yeah, that's right, I would have done that, or I wouldn't have done that. Oh, I can't believe she's doing that. Here we go again, ringing the door, whatever. You know what I'm talking about. We sort of start to identify and we get invested. Mark wants to grab us by the lapels and pull us forward and say, this is not a neutral story. You have a part to play, and the stakes are high. What kind of soil are you, friend? Okay, we'll get to that though, but that's the way this is all shaping up. And so we may feel that the responses of different characters, in this case, as Horty said, the disciples, really do elicit a kind of feeling of, oh, wow, it's nice to get it. And that's part of Mark's point, is that too often we look at, how many times in our worlds do we say, oh, well, they had all the inside information, whether it's investing or knowledge about something. And so we sort of, it sort of allows us to say, well, I didn't have a fair shot at that. I couldn't understand like they could. They had a leg up on me. We often could look at the disciples as being just the same. Oh, they had a leg up. They had the inside scoop. But the way Mark presents them is, yeah, they had the inside scoop and they still missed it, because getting it has nothing to do with the information that you get. It has everything to do with here. That's what Mark's trying to communicate. And so it's not about the fact that they were disciples. It's not about that the religious leaders had 20 years of learning the depths of, every little in and out of the law, and they knew it backwards and forwards. It has nothing to do with that sort of stuff. It has nothing to do with whether you're Jewish or Gentile. It has to do with here. Okay, that's what's being reiterated. That's what's being emphasized. And he keeps saying it in different ways because it's like throwing it in our face. The dietary laws is a huge thing. And anyone in that culture or context would recognize, well, whoa. Our identity is kind of wrapped up in our dietary laws. A lot of what distinguishes us from anyone else around us has to do with that. You're saying that's not important, Mark or Jesus? And Mark is saying, that's exactly what I'm saying. So then who are you? Whoa, that's a big question, but Mark's throwing it out there. Our identity is not wrapped up in our religious customs, our blood, our sex, our practices, all that. It's wrapped up here. It's all about what is in here. Big, big statements, big shifting of cultural understanding, and a big challenge to any of us who are reading this as an audience and coming at it with our own biases, our own cultural influences, all that stuff, okay? It's just a brilliant presentation of drawing us in by presenting all these different characters who react in ways that elicit a response from us. Marilyn. Oh, I'm sorry. Marilyn, may I, before I come to you, because I get so excited and talk, I forgot that Ken had his hand up, and then I'll come right to you. All right. So I'd seen Ken. Sorry about that, Ken.
One of the experiences I've had with being in Jewish communities is that one of the frequent sources of controversy is over the kitchen and doing everything kosher properly. But the comment I wanted to make was that after these attacks by the Pharisees, and Jesus' response is, it gives you the impression that this is ongoing attacks. And when we get to chapter 7, he's just fed up. And so it's interesting what he does next is he goes incognito with the Syrophoenician, the people who are not good Orthodox Jews.
Right. Yeah, this all is happening. So much of this is happening in Gentile country. He's up near the Sea of Galilee. That's, near the Decapolis. That's near Tyre, Sidon. All these are Gentile cities, Greek cities, so to speak. But yeah, you're absolutely right. There's a constancy with the way that the Pharisees and scribes interact with Jesus. They don't go away. Jesus explains stuff and they just keep coming back with their same hard-hearted response, impenetrable, accusatory, calling him a blasphemer, all this stuff. It's monolithic. How they respond is the same throughout the gospel. And it gets more intense. And that's what leads to, some of the resolution of the plot, because we know where this story is going. They have something to say about Jesus' fate. The soil of the hardened path, the soil of the rocks, the soil of the thorns is real. And the way that squeezes out the fruitfulness of faith is real. And the way Jesus' life is snuffed out by that is real. Okay, that's what Mark's trying to convey. It's like, this is not just, pick what soil you want to be. You want to be a nice person or not? No, it matters how we respond. And that's the tension that's building. So the Pharisees just keep coming and their attacks get more and more intense. And they start to plot more and more about what they're going to do about it. We'll start seeing that. Now, Marilyn?
Yes, I am seeing a pattern here too with food, and it's not one that we've talked about, but it makes me feel comforted by Jesus and his approach toward people, rather than thinking that he's sharp, which he also is. He is repeatedly so concerned about whether people are hungry. Mm-hmm. And if they are, what can be done about it? I mean, it's just, it's almost a kind of a law like thou shalt not be hungry.
Yeah. Well, I think you're right. He uses hunger as a means of helping to explain welcome. And what I mean by that is hunger is a dividing line within sort of customary Jewish culture along the lines of dietary customs and all the laws and kosher. So there's a dividing line there. You can't just eat willy-nilly, not in their tradition. And Jesus is using that as a way of explaining, no, you cannot set these sort of artificial divisions. Don't use the law that way. Throw it all out, because that's not what it makes us good soil in the eyes of God. None of that matters. So he's really using that as a means of saying, so all can be fed, all are welcome. The feeding of the 5,000 is a story that just sort of illustrates that abundance and that massive welcome and that massive generosity that can happen when we just get out of our own way and feed one another, or allow God to feed us, or allow the feeding to happen. Okay, so there's some good recognition there that it is comforting what Jesus is saying in a lot of these interactions, depending on your vantage point.
Mm-hmm.
And we may read it at once to sound sharp, but then again, we read it again and it sounds, oh, wow, that's a different tone that I'm picking up. And I think it's often multivalent. It has all of this enmeshed in it, because it really does depend on what we're bringing to the story, our perspective. Okay, so how about this? Let's get to the Syrophoenician woman now. What's the pattern that she exhibits in this story, and who does it remind you of, if anyone? What's the pattern that she exhibits? What does she do? How does she come to Jesus?
She's tenacious.
Yes, she is. I saw Birdie's hand go up, so I'll call on her and I'll come to you, Horty,
Yeah.
afterwards.
I love this story. And I was going to say, like Cordy, she was very persistent, you know.
Yes, she ends,
continued.
well, she ends up being very persistent. Absolutely. How about in the beginning part? What does it say about her that leads her to Jesus? Because there's a very specific pattern here. And I'm wondering if you see that, and then you can notice, was there someone else that reminds you of? Barbara Tellman?
Reminds me a little bit about the woman with the hemorrhage. And maybe that's not who you're thinking of, but
No, it's definitely, it's absolutely similar to her. Absolutely. But I also think that it's, when you look at the language, and again, it picks up thematically on what she did and her persistence and her willingness to work through, and she kind of crawls to Jesus.
yeah.
But there's someone else that this exactly parallels in terms of how they approach Jesus. And it's someone from chapter 5. Horty?
Shows you the length of my memory. The man who was the part of the at least the leadership,
Yes.
who had the daughter. His name
Synagogue
starts
leader
with
named Jairus.
Jairus.
You go
Thank
back and read chapter 5, verses 22 and 23, you will see the exact same actions. He hears about Jesus. He goes and falls on his knees before Jesus. He does the same things, asking Jesus to come and save his daughter. Same thing. Jewish synagogue leader. This woman is pretty much exact opposite of that. Okay. No name, Syrophoenician woman. Okay. Who approaches Jesus in exactly the same way as Jairus, and also to be true, the same way that the woman approaches, with that sense of faith. Okay, reaching out and having a deep sense of faith. Now, this is where we see Jesus' reaction to her. What do you make of what Jesus says to her? That initial thing. Okay, what do you make of that? Because we've just seen Jesus welcoming all people. And it's not about nationality. It's not about this. It's not about dietary. It's not about religious tradition and custom. It's just about your heart. And then he turns around and seems to forget all of that and say to her, no, let the children eat first. The children of Israel is what he's referring to when he says children. Let the children eat first. That's, not the dogs. What is he doing? What is going on? Aside from just being a jerk, okay? Let's assume that he's not just being a jerk, okay? He might be. I don't think he is. Actually, I know he's not. What is he doing? 40.
Maybe he's re-engaging the audience.
Yes, how?
Well, by pissing us off.
Well, partly, I guess, if that evokes a response, maybe that's that could be what's happening. I think there's some other possibilities too. Bertie and then Barbara Tellman.
It lets us see her faith. He knows what's in her heart, but it lets us know.
That's okay. There's a couple levels happening. One of the levels is by challenging her like this, by saying something that's really derogatory, he is allowing her faith to be revealed, because she doesn't just slink away. She stands up for herself. She rebuts him. She goes right back at him and turns his words around. And because she shows that she's got the mettle, that faith isn't just something you pay lip service to. Faith takes persistence. You use that word. Faith takes that kind of persistence. And that way of responding is similar to the woman that touched his cloak. Remember the woman that got healed from the hemorrhage that Barbara mentioned? She didn't just slink away after Jesus was like, who touched me? No, I know someone touched me. And she's fear and trembling. She could have just gone away, but she didn't. And because she had enough faith to stand up and face her fear, she experienced healing. In a similar way, this woman shows that grit, that persistence that's necessary to stay true to yourself so that you don't just slink away. Because if she had slinked away, she would have been an example not of good soil, but of thorny soil. Having the faith enough to go reach out to him, but then be too afraid to stand up to him and then just slink away. So the weeds of fear just squelched her faith. Do you see? Yeah. I forget who was next. Was it Barbara?
I thought that he was also speaking ironically. He was speaking to the Pharisees and to the children of Israel when he says the children come first. And the dogs, who in the view of the Israelites would be the Gentiles. He's using the Gentiles term to speak to the dog, to speak to the Syrophoenician woman.
Exactly. This is such a key, folks, okay? It's not Jesus being a jerk. It's not Jesus forgetting everything he just said.
No.
What has he been talking about? He's been talking to the Pharisees. He's been talking to the culture, to anyone who will listen, that the way we value each other has nothing to do with what you say it means. So he said, so I'm going to give you an example. By your way of reading the law, if he's using this interaction with the Syrophoenician woman, he's saying to the Pharisees, okay, by your way of reading the law, this woman's a dog. So I'm going to treat her like the dog that you would treat her as if we had to read the law and operate in this world the way you say. This is sort of why so ironic is a good choice. But he's throwing their belief system back in their face and saying, all right, she's a dog, right? She shouldn't have any access to this. And then by the end, he says, he's basically showing that when he heals her, when he allows her, when she participates in her own healing, when she experiences healing, he's basically saying, yeah, see, your way of understanding the way the world works, your way of naming the culture and assigning different people to lower status or high, it's all garbage. It's all folly. Okay. He was basically trying to to show us their prejudice as a culture, whether it's religious leaders or anybody, and give it to them and say, yeah, this is what your law would have me do. What do you think of it now? And he's showing that, no, that's not how it works. It's not how we operate. So he's being ironic. He might be being sarcastic. He's just using their own beliefs and putting it out there so that all of us can see. Now, we as readers, we see that and we're like, yeah, that's ridiculous. It's ridiculous to treat people like that. Of course, we don't treat them like dogs. They're human beings. They're loved by God. But the truth is, we still operate by these types of rules today. We make up all sorts of rules about who's worthy and who's not. What types of lives mean more in this world than others. That's something. Those are standards that still exist. They may not be as codified in the same way that the law did back in the day with Israel, but there are lots of things codified in our mores, in our norms, and even in our laws. Okay, so he's naming all this. That's what he's doing. He's naming it. He's showing it to us, and he's saying, "Yeah, this is garbage. Don't to assess people like that. It's garbage." That's the couple. There's a couple levels then that interaction with the Syrophoenician woman is not about any of that stuff. Not about your nationality. Not about your sex. Not about anything. It's just about here. Just about here. Any other comments? Does it seem clearer now about that, boys?
Seems like Mark is also saying women are important.
Absolutely.
And that they need to be listened to, because my version says he was impressed with this woman.
Okay.
And so it's like, oh, he's impressed with a woman, and usually it's in that day it would be impressed with a man, not a woman.
Yeah, he's taking every category he can find and utilizing it to say neither Jew nor Gentile, neither slave nor free, neither male nor female, all the categories we want to use that we use to elevate some and denigrate others. He's wiping them out. He says none of that matters. And for you to pass on the tradition as if that does matter is a perversion to what God intends. That's what the comment means, with the Pharisees early on in chapter 7, when he's talking about how they hand on this thing as that they made up these rules and these ways of reading things that they're not what God intended. And that's truly, that happens in every religion. The Christianity we have today it's different than what it's hard to know. But it's invariably much different than what the original followers of Jesus, the original followers of the way, practiced. So, Bertie?
Yeah. I love the fact that her faith is strong enough that her daughter can be healed even when she's not present.
Right.
And I think that has such meaning for us today. Many of us in the study have grown children and grandchildren that don't live in our household, but we continue to pray for them and for their well-being. And it just illustrates the faith that a mother can have, and the influence she can have even when you're apart.
Yeah, what a beautiful read, especially now, not just as a parent of grown children, but as a parent of grown children in the age of COVID, where we're sort of just not even capable of sort of going to see and be present with one another. There's a lot of meaningful connections here that open the door to our appreciation of what these stories convey to us about the compassion of Jesus and the power of faith. It works on many levels. But just like, the story of Jairus, this religious leader, it's the same. The result is the same with the Syrophoenician woman. She is treated just like him, because it's not about his position versus hers. It's about the faith that they exhibit. That's all that matters. That's all that matters. Let's see. Oh, let's get to the next one, unless there's any other comments about the Syrophoenician woman. Ken?
It's interesting that there is a different word that she uses for dogs than originally appears.
Like puppies or something like that. Yeah. Yeah, right. He uses the word in the Greek. It's that sort of means dogs, and she uses puppies. And what may be happening there is that she's trying to identify that she is just as, if you call her a dog, whatever, but she is still a child of the inheritance. You know, it's another way of sort of claiming faith in a subtle way, but she is certainly persistent. But let's get to the deaf gentleman. This is a peculiar healing in that it's the first one that has involved kind of like a strange method. You probably noticed there's a lot of the detail that goes into that. There's a strange method. And can you sense, is there anything about the way that's presented that gives you an indication of what Mark's trying to do? Is he setting us up for something here? Why do you think he presents this miracle in such elaborate, strange terms in the ways that Jesus does the healing? It's different than how he's done any other healing to this point. Horty.
It seems to me that the man presents some real specificity in his needs, and Jesus addresses those by touching him at those places of that specificity. He touches his ears. He touches the man's tongue with having touched his own tongue where he spit. It's just, to me, it was so tender because it was not just you are healed, but it was really addressing the needs that the man brought to Jesus himself.
Yeah, it's a good noticing right there. To me, it is an acknowledgement of the very specific nature. And not only is it a story about the interaction between Jesus and this man, but on the larger level, it's Mark's way of connecting us once again to when we have hearing, when we can hear, like really hear, because remember we've talked about this, then the good soil is potential within us. That hearing and speaking are all characteristics of the ones who are healed. To be able to speak and to hear, it's almost every single person, not everyone, but almost every single person that experiences healing. Jesus tells them, okay, now shut up about this. And what do? The opposite. They go and they're telling it to the world. Okay. Jesus doesn't get mad about this, by the way. Okay. That's not a problem. But he constantly is telling them to stop. So the fact that this man is not only deaf, but has a speech impediment or is mute, it depends on your translation. He is another means, another vehicle for helping Mark kind of make the connection that when we experience healing, we are made more powerfully able to speak and to really hear what Jesus is talking about. Okay. It's kind of like the man with the withered hand. You know, it's not just that it healed his hand, but it healed his capacity to give and to receive, to be a part of the transaction of grace and of compassion that is required in community. So healings are not just about the physical nature, the physical healing, but it's about what do then they allow. And in this case, the hearing and the voice allows that man to go out and to spread that word. And it says zealously. It doesn't name him specifically, but it names him as part of that larger group that's just like, you know, going out there and uncontrollable. Okay. So what is it? Why is it? First of all, anything else about the little details that Jesus, with him doing the little stuff and saying the word and touching the tongue and the ears? Any other comments about that? Marilyn? Oh, and then Kathleen? Unmute.
Seems to me that Jesus was doing things that would have to be considered unclean by Jewish law. You know, my goodness, spitting and then touching the guy's tongue and
absolutely
his fingers in his ears.
Yes. Once again, trying to blur the lines to just to that would offend some and liberate others. And the whole point is he's just said none of it matters, and now he's exhibiting it. Yes, yes, absolutely. Kathleen?
Well, I found it, Jesus to be aggressive there, sort of contrary to what Horty was saying. I thought it was quite an action that he took instead of just touching the hem of his gown or something like that, but he really went to it.
Yeah, he really engaged on a different level.
Mhm.
And I think you are right there. And so the question is, why, if that's the case, and let's just say that could well be the case, that Jesus is expending more effort on this one. So why would Mark be making this shift? What is Mark maybe starting to indicate here with this type of a healing story?
Maybe that I just get the feeling that Jesus is going to make an impact somehow. And if I have to do it by putting my finger in your ear and, I'll do it. But somehow I'm not giving up here. I'm going to let you see.
Yeah. Okay. I like where you're going here. And I'll say this, because when we're at the beginning of something that Mark is trying to, because there's a transition that's starting to happen with this healing that we'll start to see more examples of as we go forward. Okay. But what you just named, that whole spirit of Jesus not giving up, there's something there.
That's all.
You can sense it just because of this particular healing. But again, as we go along, we're going to start to see more resistance, more difficulty for Jesus to do the work that he is empowered to do. And it's not because Jesus is losing power. His battery isn't draining. It's nothing to do with that. But where Mark's starting to go, and this is what I meant when I talked about at the beginning, when I said he's starting to arc toward a downhill slope towards Jerusalem now, towards the Passion. Jesus will start to be experiencing and surrounded by the types of soil and the types of attention that have malicious intent, okay? We've seen that all these healing stories are surrounded by the language of, and his fame spread far and wide, and everyone knew about him, and everyone flocked to him, and everyone, they're not stopping the story, okay? But with all that positive attention comes some other attention. We've already seen that Herod had heard all those stories too. And Herod, while he was given some good characteristics, he was a thorny character. He was someone that gave into malicious intent, gave into evil. Evil is real, and the types of soil that would do evil to Jesus are also real. This story, with Jesus engaging a little more effort to heal this man, not only exhibits that he will go to any lengths to heal someone, but it also exhibits that the soil that's starting to surround Jesus is getting a little more challenging. And again, that might not all be revealed in this particular story, but we'll start to see that present, that the evil, that the hardness of heart are starting to creep in, okay? And they're going to make it harder because there's only a few more healings that happen in the entire gospel. Like one more miracle story, I think it's the feeding of the 4,000, and then a couple more healings, but they get harder. There's things that happen, okay? So there's a movement here that's also happening where Mark's turning a corner a bit, okay, with some of these healings. I want to call on a couple, make sure I get a good example here or spread here. So I see Susan Moore, hadn't called on you yet, and then I want to go to Boyce, and then I saw Birdie and Barbara Tillman.
Well, this time of the year, I think of Isaiah and the Messiah. And so I was reading some of it yesterday, and it just seemed, he talks about seeing and hearing a number of times in Isaiah. And so I was just struck by the fact that he will not judge by what he sees with his eyes or decide by what he hears with his ears, but with righteousness he will judge the needy, with justice give decisions for the poor. It just made me think of this scripture too that we're studying today, and that I need to see more in a way that God sees.
Yeah.
and hear in that way, to be what he wants.
Yeah, and it's an interesting point, because whether it's seeing or hearing, when Isaiah is saying, don't judge based on what you see or hear, it's not just that. Where Mark's going with it is he's taking that idea and I think saying, look, we all will hear something, but what is it that motivates your response based on what you're hearing? Where are you giving your attention to? And our ability to be good soil is about, okay, we hear different things, but are we understanding? Are we really following? Are we really going? Are we making the difficult choice, the persistent choice, the faithful choice, or are we making the fearful choice? Are we ruled by different standards based on what we hear or see? And so Mark is taking that idea, you're right, because Isaiah is speaking to, we don't just go by surface seeing and surface hearing. There's a deeper hearing and a deeper seeing here. Mark's picking up definitely on that idea, but playing with it a little bit too, because it's not about, it's not about not hearing, it's about what you're hearing. I think Boyce was next.
My version says that Jesus took the man off by himself,
Mhm.
and all the other healings, it was with people watching. And did he not want people to watch because what he sees coming down the road and he wants to downplay his healing here?
I don't think he's trying to downplay, but it plays into that consistent theme of Jesus trying to basically keep people quiet or tell them to stay silent and not tell them what has happened or who he is, kind of thing. Okay. All of that is a failure. He fails miserably in keeping people from spreading the news. Okay. But we need to look at that a little more, because does he get upset at that? Is he upset at people saying it? No, not at all. And in fact, we've already been told why it must be. In chapter 4, right after the parable of the sower, there's that line that I quoted at the beginning of the class that I wrote down so I don't mess it up. But it's the whole idea, for there is nothing hid except to be made manifest, nor is anything secret except to come to light. He knows that there's no stopping it. Ultimately, he knows that the spreading of the story is necessary. He wants people to spread it. He wants the story to be shared. But he also recognizes that to share it in the positive ways also invites negative attention. That you find good soil when you share it, you create more of that, but you also draw in the other types of soil that have malicious intent. And it's about trying to enable as much good soil as possible. So he tries to keep it under wraps, but never is it intended to be ultimately kept a secret, because he knows it's going to blow up. It's intended to do that. It must do that. It's just like the parable that follows the sower as well, that the good soil generates of itself. It just does it. That's what happens. And so it's not about the hard work of Jesus or whatever. It's about then once the seed is planted, then those people just go out on their own and they are doing it. They are generating this. You can't stop it, but it's not meant to be stopped. And all of this, keep it secret. No, go tell, or look at, they're all telling. What is that doing? As a reader, it creates tension in us, because it brings us to that fundamental question. Oh man, what would I do? Would I go tell? Wait, do I go tell? Am I telling? And all these different things, we start to connect, we start to interact with it, and it creates a tension in us. Okay, what kind of soil am I? Okay, good stuff. I forgot. I named 2 other people, and it's hard to keep track. Let's see who's. Let me look around at you. I think Birdie was one of them, and then I forget the last one, because some people dropped off, and so your little faces are moving around on my screen. So now I was like, I pointed there. Anyway, Birdie, I think you had your hand up.
I did, but my point was the same as Boyce's, that that he took him aside away from the crowd.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
and it did puzzle me a bit, and I wondered if it was partly because of the soil that was around him, that the negativity around him.
Yeah, well, I think there's something being, again, there's a transition that's starting to happen here that isn't fully developed yet. But again, as we read into chapter 8, we'll start to see it more. We'll start to see more examples of Mark kind of illustrating that the walk is getting tougher. The healings are getting tougher. Jesus' journey is marching not towards glory and laud, but it's marching toward Palm Sunday, which is, starts with glory and laud, yeah, but it doesn't work out that way in the end. And then there was one other hand, I know it. Nope, no more hands. Okay. I apologize if someone didn't get to say something there, but all right. I think, basically, I think we covered my last question, that whole why he emphasizes this refrain from saying anything. He never intends the secret to be kept forever. He knows that the only way this works is if it's shared. But that whole, reiterating, stay silent, as they go tell, it really creates this dynamic within us. How do we respond? Well, what do I do? Am I silent? Do I stay silent or do I speak? Am I ready to speak? Do I know enough? Well, it's not about how much I know. So we go through all this stuff, and Mark's trying to lay it all out there so that we can maybe step out of our heads and move from a different place within ourselves as we respond to this message, to this story. Any closing comments? Horty?
I just wondered if you could cite the verse that you said about nothing can be hidden. Can you come with it?
Chapter 4, verse 22. And it's in the notes. It'll be in the class notes for today. But yeah, I'm happy to do that. Yeah, so just go back to the parable of the sower and then a couple parables that happened just after it. All right, well, it's good to sit with you again and chew on all this wonderful meal of material. I hope you have a fantastic, beautiful Christmas Eve and Christmas. We will meet next week because I think it's fun. And it's important to keep our community going. Normally, if I was going away for a few days, but I said to Andrea, I'm just going to roll with this. Let's keep going. So we will meet next week, and we will also be having a Christmas Eve bonfire service outside with masks and distancing. So if you feel inclined, please do join us on Christmas Eve at 5 p.m. up in the church parking lot.
Once again, you've turned us all on our heads, Dan.
Good. I'm in that position all the time. So good. We should be, we should be thrown. And if you're feeling that way, it means that you care and you're invested and you're kind of reacting to the story in the ways that Mark intends. So this is good. We won't always be on our heads though. We won't always be on our heads, but it's a good spot to be. Good. Okay, friends. Until next time.
Thank you all.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.